Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. I'm Joel Nichols and I work here in our Strategic Initiatives Department. I'm honored to welcome you all. Our guest tonight captained a Federation starship, proving that a woman could be as cocky as Kirk and as wise as Picard. Woo! Her Emmy-nominated portrayal of Galina Reznikov, as brutal as she is tender, reminds us that red is the new black. In addition, speaking to you all here now as an adoptive parent celebrating open adoption options that were not available to her, I want to draw your attention to the power of the anguishing and truly redemptive story of her daughter Danielle. With no further delay, Ms. Captain Kate Mulgrew.
So happy to be at the Free Library of Philadelphia. Now, I have written a book, and I'm going to read a few excerpts, if that's all right, and I beg you to be merciful. My mother attended the president's funeral and returned a week later, just in time to have her 8th baby. This time, she stayed in the hospital longer than she had with any of her other deliveries. But what was most troubling was the appearance of a young farm girl at the back door one afternoon. A plain, straw-haired girl who carried a suitcase and said her name was Dora Lamb, and could she please come in? My father escorted this girl into the kitchen and introduced her as a mother's helper. She was to live in the maid's room, and evidently, she was going to help our mother. When my mother came home, we all gathered in the front yard to greet her. Dad helped her out of the car, and smiling, she walked toward us carrying a pink bundle in one arm and a shopping bag in the other. She turned to Dora Lamb, transferred the pink bundle to her arms, and said, "Her name is Jenny. Good luck." Then she went into the house, all of us trailing behind her like ducklings. And when she reached the TV room, she took off her coat, reached into the shopping bag, and withdrew what looked like a large jar of preserves. She then proceeded to pull an ottoman over to the fireplace, and in one deft move, she jumped onto it, kissed the jar, and placed it with 2 hands dead center on the mantelpiece. "I think I'd like a drink," she called to my father, and sailed into the kitchen. We all ran to the fireplace, mad with curiosity, and climbing onto whatever pieces of furniture we could find, examined the mysterious jar. It was filled with amber liquid, in which were floating my mother's ovaries, which, just before she'd gone under, she had instructed Dr. Sharp to pickle. On the ride home, she had taken out one of her felt pens, and on a broad strip of medical tape she had stolen from the operating room in which her hysterectomy had been performed, she had written in bold black ink, "From whence you sprang." My parents decided that the Derby Grange schoolhouse was somehow insufficient to meet our intellectual needs, and so we were transferred to the local Catholic grammar school, which was called, disturbingly, Resurrection. A flat and unprepossessing building, it sat amid acres of farmland and had little to recommend it, from my point of view, other than a small woman named Sister Benedict, who taught the 5th grade and who first recognized in me the poet I longed to become. She was a plain woman with a severe overbite and kind, beautiful brown eyes. The sisters often attended Mass with the parishioners, and one Sunday I was keenly aware of Sister Benedict's watchful eyes on my family. My father knelt at one end of the pew, and next to him, in various states of regrettable posture, were Tom, Joe, Laura, Tess, Sam, Jenny, myself, and finally, Mother, who was not kneeling at all, but instead sat on the bench with legs crossed, a thermos of coffee open beside her, and in her hands a book entitled The Ethics of Spinoza. The next day at school, Sister Benedict stopped me in the hall and said, "Your mother's a very interesting person, isn't she? Maybe you'd like to invite her to the poetry contest next week. She seems like the kind of person who might enjoy that." Home I went, full of happy anticipation. When I told my mother that not only had I been writing poetry on the sly, but that it appeared my poems were of exceptional quality, because Sister Benedict had chosen me out of the entire 5th grade to compete in the Resurrection School annual poetry contest that was to be held the following week. Not only that, Mom, I said, but she wants you to come and hear me recite my poems. My mother cocked her head and, looking at me curiously, said, I think I have something for you, kitty cat girl. I followed her up the front stairs to her bedroom, where she kept a collection of her favorite books in a corner bookshelf near the window. She pulled out a slim volume with the blue and white cover and handed it to me. This is a terrific poem about World War I by the writer Alice Duer Miller, and it's called The White Cliffs. I think when you've finished reading your original poems, you should just surprise the nuns and just sail right into this one and see what happens. Fun, don't you think? My mother's idea of fun was a 50-page poem about an American girl and an English aristocrat who meet in London on the eve of World War I and fall in love. We follow the young woman's narrative through romance, marriage, childbirth, war, the death of her husband, and finally into her middle age, at which point she stands overlooking the white cliffs of Dover and says, I am American bred. I have seen much to hate here, much to forgive. But in a world where England is finished and dead, I do not wish to live. On the afternoon of the poetry contest, we were all led into the school auditorium, which doubled as the cafeteria, and told to take our seats as designated. The nuns and priests and a few of the ladies who worked the lunch shift sat on one side of the room, and the entire rest of the school body sat on the other. We, the poets, were given seats of honor in the very front row. The program began, and I sat stiffly through what I considered several really boring readings of very bad poems, until at last my name was called. I walked to the podium with my sheaf of poems in hand and looked out over the crowd. Kids of all ages and sizes, girls in ill-fitting uniforms and boys sporting John Deere caps, most of whom were making inappropriate sounds and fidgeting wildly in their metal chairs. On the other side of the room, the nuns and priests regarded me in austere silence. Suddenly, something at the back of the room caught my eye, and in a moment of tremendous relief and joy, I recognized my mother in her ubiquitous gray sweater, a red kerchief tied around her hair, leaning casually against the door. She acknowledged me with a small smile and a covert rolling of her hand, which I had been trained to understand meant, get on with it. After I read my 5 original poems, I eagerly awaited the response of my audience, but there was none. Sister Benedict clapped once or twice out of Christian charity, but other than that, it was dead quiet. At that moment, I pulled the white cliffs from my blazer pocket and, taking a deep breath and without explanation, began to read. I didn't stop until I had read the whole thing. When I was finished, I looked up and realized, with a pang, that my mother was no longer standing in the back of the room. She had moved closer and now stood next to the row of nuns, and she was clapping. The nuns were applauding too, but something else was happening that I found even more disconcerting. Most of the nuns had tears streaming down their cheeks. Sister Mary Elizabeth was laughing and crying simultaneously, and Sister Benedict was standing, clapping delightedly and beaming with pride. On the way home, my mother was silent. This did not bode well, I knew. And although I was devastated, I turned my back to her and, feigning indifference, stared out the window as we drove past Grunow's Creek and started up the long gravel road toward home. Just as we were about to drive through the stone gates, my mother suddenly switched off the ignition and turned to face me. You know, kitten, I watched you today, and it dawned on me that you can either be a mediocre poet or a great actress. Now, which do you think you'd rather be? I didn't know what to say to her then, but as it turned out, no words were necessary. The following night, I found the complete works of William Shakespeare tucked under my pillow, and a note from my mother which read, "Find what you love, and the rest will follow." May I do one more? Just one more quickly. Can you hear me? Actresses. What a bunch of sad saps we are, I thought. Madly in love with the child, madly in love with the craft, trying desperately to forge an alliance between the two and constantly failing. If I were a man, I said to myself, none of this would be in question. My children would respect me, my wife would honor me, and everyone would exalt the work. But turn the knife just slightly to the left, and what you have is a harried woman sneaking out before dawn, cracking the whip for 16 hours on a soundstage, creeping back home under cover of night, forever explaining, forever apologizing, forever in conflict. Picasso wasn't in conflict. You can bet your bottom dollar on that. He said, "Scram, I need to work," and his mistresses and their spawn ran for the hills. Dickens wasn't in conflict. He had 10 children and wrote as many novels in almost as many years because it was both understood and appreciated that he was gifted, famous, and rich. The male artist has always been respected. For the actress, there is no resolution. Read the life of Eleonora Duse. Read the life of Sarah Bernhardt. Conflict and toil, occasionally leavened by illicit romance. Duse, arguably the greatest actress who ever lived, sent her only daughter to a convent so as not to expose her to the tawdry perils of life in the theater. Shortly after giving birth to an illegitimate son, Maurice, Bernhardt resumed her lucrative career as a courtesan. It wasn't until she clawed her way back to her rightful place on the stage that she bought the famous coffin in which she was photographed, eyes closed. Maurice must have had mixed feelings about nap time. I played Captain Janeway in an era that had not resolved the conflicts surrounding mothers and work. The major studios were still struggling to present their actresses as superwomen. No one wanted to hear about the difficulties of raising children. Not really. It was only acceptable to talk about rising above these difficulties and managing to do everything well to contribute to the great myth: women are master multitaskers who fly through space spouting technobabble at Warp 9.9, who then beam themselves home in time for dinner, prepared by hand on a 4-burner Viking stove, tuck their tired but happy children into their lavender-scented beds, learn 10 pages of dialogue to perfection while soaking luxuriously in a bubble bath, and finally, reluctantly, turning out the light because, by God, she still has energy to burn. I sighed and got up from the chair. I dropped a light kiss on Ian's brow, and then, as an afterthought, gently stroked his hair. Such beautiful hair. Such a beautiful boy. I turned out the hall light and looked in on Alec before I headed upstairs, the hand outstretched, relaxed, beckoning. I tiptoed to his bedside, knelt down, and kissed those fingertips one by one. He didn't stir. Then I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, where I would forego a bath, run a toothbrush across my teeth, remove my fancy premiere makeup, force myself to study my pages for tomorrow's work, set the alarm for a 3:45 a.m. wake-up, and switch off the lamp. Multitasking, indeed. There you are. Thank you. Thank you. Episodes from my life. Now I'd love to take some questions, if you have questions. Do you have questions?
Hi. I'm a fifth-generation Iowan.
A fifth generation?
I am. And one of the things I really loved about your book was that there seems to be sort of a subtle subtext of a love story or a love letter to Iowa and growing up there, and wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and how it shaped your life and your story.
Oh, that's just it. It did shape me, didn't it? Yeah. I've often said I've had the best of both worlds. Not just that I was one of 8 children born into this Irish Catholic family to 2 dramatic and eccentric, unorthodox, extraordinary parents, but my father bought a house 20 miles outside of the city on an estate of 50 acres, and we called it Derby Grange, and it was a magical kingdom. And since my mother didn't really have any boundaries, I don't think she could spell that word. We did it all, we saw it all, we invented it all. Our imaginations ran wild, and so did we, and it was marvelous. And isn't it funny? You'll get this, won't you? It was so beautiful that coming to New York seemed just an absolute natural fit. I stepped out of the cornfields of Iowa onto Fifth Avenue and said, perfect. Thank you for that
I
question.
just wanted to say I've been following you since you were Mary Ryan on Ryan's Hope.
That's a long time.
Love it, love it. I just wanted to ask, I know you've done a lot of films and movies and shows, and what was your most challenging role as an actor?
In all of it? Stage, film, television, or life? Oh, Janeway, no question. I mean, I loved her. Loved her. There was no greater role an actress could play than that of the first female captain of a starship. But let me tell you a little bit about hardship, because I was introduced to the rigors of filmmaking as I had never been before. And because I was the first female, they were, would you raise your hand so I can focus on you? Yes, I'm looking all around. They were very focused on my physicality. So with the hair and the bosoms and the boots and the hips and the poem, right? I had 7 hairdos in 6 months. I said, she's not commanding a starship. She's going to the hair salon in her ready room. Something Captain Picard never had to worry about. With all due respect. So I went to the producers and I said, I'm pleading with you guys. Do you think these men are stupid? Because the male demographic of 15 to 35 was their demographic, and that's what they really wanted. And I said, why don't you just let me command the ship? And then we'll see if they'll come over to my side. Stop with the hair. Stop with the steel buns. Stop with the And they did, to their credit. And it was then that, of course, that demographic began to grow in leaps and bounds. So it's all about command. That's all they're interested in, right? Red alert. Thank you. Yes.
More questions. You've had such a beautiful, rich life. What's next? What do you look forward to? What is
A
left
nap.
for you?
Actually, to the contrary. I don't think I felt this good, I'd say, in 20 years. I was given this role of Galina Reznikov on Orange is the New Black. When I turned about, I guess, 57, maybe I was 56. I'm 59. This is my last day of being 59. And you know what? Relinquishing that vanity that I had been tethered to. Did you find him?
I'll open the door. Keep talking.
I can't imagine what he's going to bring out next. Because no matter what role I played, it was always about the strong heroine, the good-looking heroine, the trim heroine. You know, it all had to be in place. Finally, here's this woman, right? And she is alive. It's very vivid, from the nails to the hair to the lips to the whole thing. But she's deep. She's complex. Her life rests in something far, far deeper than how she looks. And it liberated. Thank you. Well done. Let's give him a hand. Now I can see you, and you are, in fact, very handsome. So I just felt a sense of freedom that I'd never felt before. And shortly thereafter came this, not epiphany, but my mother had died, my father had died. My relationship with my daughter had developed. 16 years. Deepened. It was solid. It was steady. I thought, now's the time. I'm going to write it. Because the Irish don't like to go, we keep it close to the vest. But I thought, no. My story is alive. And I want to write it while it is alive and vivid and can be shared. I think she wants to ask me a question about probably my love life. Is she 5? Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Lady in the front row.
Yes, ma'am.
I was like 13 when Voyager came out, and I was more Galina than Janeway. But I always aspired to
You
be.
were more Galina than Janeway?
Oh, yes, fiery, but vulnerable. I aspired to be like Janeway, but it
Just
didn't
a
happen.
minute, I have
anyway,
to take a drink.
I'm also an artist, and I had secured a professional dance contract, and then I found out I was pregnant. And I'd heard a little bit about your story, and I was wondering if, by the way, I kept my son, and he's 10.
Good.
And it's been very difficult, but I wanted to applaud you for your bravery. And has it been odd with people coming to you with stories like that, or are you proud of being able to kind of be a trailblazer that way? Because that was probably an unexpected spin-off of your career, you being so dedicated to your craft.
I wouldn't say I was a trailblazer in that way, darling. I was a young woman who got pregnant, as many of us do, unexpectedly, accidentally, devastatingly, at the beginning of our lives, right? And I had done everything to ensure that this did not happen, and it did. So you're not, by the virtue of revealing this, it is not trailblazing, and I'm not even sure it's particularly brave, but it is deeply human. And I knew that there was no question I was going to have that baby, and I knew that there was no question after I gave that baby up that I had deep and immediate regret, and that I would have to find her. So I think it is the story about the flaws. It is the story, certainly, about the great sadness of life, and then the inexpressible joy of sticking to the path, right? And believing. I really believed I would find her. And I certainly did. So thank you for that question. And you are lovely.
As a
Yes.
follow-up to that, would you have anything as a Irish Catholic, and you did say any questions, would you have anything to say to the sisters who did not choose the path that you chose?
Well, that was their choice, right? I think it's a deeply organic thing. You make the choice depending on who you are and what you know you can do and what you can't do, what you can manage and what you can't manage. And I could not manage anything other than what I managed, which was to give her life. The renunciation of that life was the hard thing I found very tough to manage, and that's why I went right back to Catholic Charities and told them I'd made a mistake, but of course the door had been summarily closed because that's the Roman Catholic Church.
Hi, I don't know if you're aware, but recently one of the astronauts on board the International
I
Space
heard
Station
about this story.
adorned a Voyager uniform in recognition of you and said, "Oh, there's coffee in that nebula." So
I don't think I ever said it that nicely, did I? I said there's coffee in that nebula. Yes. How great, right?
And I wanted to know if you're aware how much you've been an inspiration for young women who want to go into STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, who want to be astronauts, who want to become kind of that next generation of trailblazers in the sciences. So I wanted to thank you kind of on behalf of young women who are inspired by Kathryn Janeway on Star Trek.
Aren't you lovely?
I wanted to make you so aware of that.
You know, this, above all other things, is the most gratifying, that I have had that influence because I did play that character, and evidently well enough to inspire thousands of young women. I get letters from them. They tell me all the time that they were going into research, and now they're going into the field. Hell, they're going up, you know? It's terribly exciting, ennobling, and I've always said about Janeway, what a privilege, right? What a privilege to have had this influence. So thank you,
So I have
and good luck to
two
you.
questions. They're pretty easy. One, where can I get a pierogi?
W-
And pierogi. And do you have any of those poems that you wrote as a kid? Do you still?
Somebody else asked me this. You know, no, they're all gone. But I remember every single word of the White Cliffs of Dover. And this is life. And you can get a pierogi at my shop in Queens. Yes, let's have a man. Yes.
Third row here.
You speak so fluently and in such detail in every sentence that I would think most of the people here would rush out to buy your books.
That most of the people here would be what?
Would rush out of here to buy your books.
From your mouth, sir, to God's ears. Thank you. What a lovely thing to say. I do love men.
Happy birthday. First.
Thank you. Yes. We're hanging on. But thank you.
I wanted to ask, I've been an actor and I've been a writer, and they both have really frustrating challenges, both of them, as well as many, many joys, as you know. from taking words that you perform on the page to putting your own words on the page. What was that journey like? What was that challenge like?
Surprisingly, just so blissful. Despite pockets of real anguish and torment and blocks and all of that, I took a house by the seaside, and I wrote it in 9 months, maybe 10 months. I sat down at 9 o'clock, and I wrote till 4, often getting up for an hour or two and slamming my head against the wall. But it was a kind of process. I think I'm a process-oriented person, and I think it was so ready to live that every day was a joy to me. And I couldn't wait to get up in the morning. Going to bed was an agony of my mind turning over. Next day, what am I going to do? And it was a bit like falling in love. So I hope I will have that chance again. My publisher in the front row. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So some of your Voyager castmates have joined on to Star Trek Online to voice their characters. I was wondering if you would ever reprise your role as Kathryn Janeway.
If I would do what with it?
Reprise your role as Kathryn Janeway.
Yes, but only one under this set of circumstances. Myself, Captain Kirk, Captain Picard. But I am the Admiral. Oh, yeah. The day is a-coming.
Real quickly, one is when Voyager was at its height, I was a single mom living here in Philadelphia with 2 young children.
Oh, good.
My only daughter's here with me tonight.
Aww.
So thank you so much for bringing joy to our lives and giving my son and my daughter a female role model to look up to. So thank you.
And something to watch for an hour, so you can...
Yeah, oh, word up, sister, oh yeah.
That's
I
great.
said, let mommy open her laptop, you watch Star Trek, I'll catch it later, thank you very much. But also, I'm also a registered nurse, and I know you've had personal experience with Alzheimer's disease. So what I'd like to know is, for those of us in the healthcare professions, what would you most like us to know as somebody who's cared for somebody for Alzheimer's? What do you wish we knew more? What do you wish we asked more? What do you wish we cared more about?
I don't know, it's too tough, love. Science is doing everything it can, but you know, it's not a sexy disease, so we don't have any money. Every clinical trial is $30 million, and somebody always dies. We have to start all over again. The money goes to cancer, mostly breast cancer. But I don't know. I don't know. Something's got to be done because it's, you know, in another 50 years, this thing is going to be frightening. So the more you read about it and the more you talk about it, the more you help it. I encourage those conversations. Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. You're very dapper.
Thank you. I put it on for you. Not
That's
gonna
very
lie.
nice.
So I read recently in Entertainment Weekly that Richard Burton told you early in your career to get the F out.
He did. Have the children left the building?
Yes. I tried to be as
Yeah.
sensitive as possible. My question for you would be, in retrospect, if you had gotten out, what would you have done? What would you have pursued?
Medicine. I always loved medicine because I loved to work. But I'm sure I would have been lost in that moment. You know, what he was saying was, what he was really saying that night in the candlelight after 15 whiskeys was, I was meant to be a poet, and I've been reduced to being this movie star, and I'm better than that. And you, I think, are better than that. But of course, I went in the other room, had another whiskey, and said, sorry, I'm going to work tomorrow. And I'm awfully glad I did. Very good question. Thank you. Hi. Hi.
So I have to admit that I binge listened to your book.
Oh, you did the audio one.
I did the audio because I love your voice.
Thank you.
I've always loved the sound of your voice.
Thank you.
And so even though I want you to sell a lot of books, you can sell them on Audible as well. Just a little pitch there. And then I became obsessed with wanting to go back in time and revisit you. So I Googled and found episodes of Ryan's Hope, which is on television.
My Lord. You can find them on
the
Google?
computer,
You can Google them?
They're on the computer, yes. You just put your name in with the word YouTube afterwards, and it is overwhelming.
I'll bet.
But respectfully, I stumbled upon, and this may be really hard for me to bring this up, but I can't get it out of my mind. I stumbled upon the episode when you went back to work right after you had your baby and had that real baby in that bed with you.
Yeah.
And I know it's a tribute to your extraordinary talent, but still, I just wonder.
No. Do you want me to read you that little bit? It's only a
Sure.
page.
Okay.
I'll
Thank
read you
you.
that. Because for me to try to explain it is too hard. Oh, glasses. I'm just going to read this. Then. 3 days after the baby was born, I returned to work. I entered the studio and was greeted by the floor manager, Briggsy, who lacked his usual exuberance. Neither Claire nor any of the other producers was present. Leela Swift, the director, embraced me and asked, "Are you okay?" "Yes," I replied. "I'm fine." "Well," Leela went on, "this is the scene where Mary comes home from the hospital with her baby. While she waits for the family to arrive, she has some time alone with her child. You got the script, right? It's a bit of a monologue." I nodded and said, "Let's get going. Roll tape on the first take." I took my place behind the living room set door. Suddenly, the studio nurse approached me, carrying an infant in her arms. When she attempted to give me the baby, I held up my hand and said, "Wait until the red light goes off." At my cue, I signaled the nurse to give me the stunt baby, took her in my arms, and entered the living room of the Ryan family home. Standing in the middle of the room, I delivered the monologue to the baby, as directed. A monologue about love, a monologue about courage, a monologue about, above all else, loyalty, ending with the words, "I will never leave you, Ryan. We will never be separated. That is my solemn promise." The first take was flawless, not a word out of place. I looked up at the control room, where often, if the scene was particularly difficult, the producers would flip on the lights and stand up, clapping, in a collective show of appreciation. But today, after this scene, there was nothing. No one spoke. The control room remained detached and silent. I turned to Leela and asked, "Acceptable?" She nodded. I beckoned to the studio nurse and, handing the stunt baby to her, said, "Take it." Claire had written me only one scene on my first day back. Not even a scene, really. A monologue. A beautifully crafted monologue that would, everyone knew, go a long way toward improving our sagging ratings. My work done, I gathered myself and walked toward the open door. That's the best way I can explain it.
Most of your discussion here has been about your TV career, but I'd like to hear you, it's a two-part question. I'd like to hear you speak about your stage career, especially when you played Katharine Hepburn, one great Katharine playing another great Katharine. And then my second part, which I'm hoping you answer too, is what role would be your ideal role that you'd like to do?
I just played her. It was a little late in the day, but I played Cleopatra and broke both of my feet. Vanity. Well, I didn't want to wear sandals, they were very difficult sandals, so I said, let me do it in bare feet because I'm running on concrete and up and down the steel girders, and when the asp comes and Antony comes, I got to be. So fine, you do that for 3 months and you rupture your planters and plates, so that's what happened. But I loved Cleopatra. And people say that I was a combination of Katharine Hepburn playing Kathryn Janeway. Red alert, right? Species 8472. Try to combine those two. I've had a great time. Hedda Gabler was probably one of my greatest roles. Very difficult to play. I write about that in the book. I've been lucky. From Emily Webb in Our Town to Cleopatra to Katharine Hepburn, it's been absolutely wonderful.
So what's the role that you haven't played yet that you still hope to play?
I would love to get my arms around Madame Arkadina, Chekhov. I have only Chekhov left, and he's the toughest. So that will come when I'm 80.
wanted to follow back up on Voyager, and it's just what went through your mind when you found out that you got the role and you had to be the first female captain in this Star Trek franchise.
What went through my mind?
Yeah, anxieties and the like.
No time. Don't forget I wasn't the first choice. Geneviève Bujold was the first choice, the great French-Canadian actress who wisely defected after 24 hours. Are you kidding? I have a life, she said. So they called 4 of us back in. It's called a knockout, a network knockout, in front of 50 guys. We all went in, 4 actresses, and did 2 scenes. One was a scene with Tuvok, and the other is the monologue to the crew when we're lost in the Delta Quadrant, when Janeway misses the gas station. Famous, right? But I didn't know anything about Star Trek. I'd heard of it. Of course, you'd have to be an idiot not to have heard of it. I remember somebody said to me once at a wedding reception, Patrick Stewart is here, Captain Picard is here, don't you want to meet him? I said, who is he? He's a captain from Star Trek. I said, Star Trek? What is Star Trek? Is that where they fly around with capes in space? No, it's a $1 billion franchise, you idiot, and he's magnificent. So, after I did the audition, I went home, and I heard nothing for 3 days. I thought, that's it, I didn't get it. And as always has been my ritual when I miss a role or am rejected, I am despondent for 3 hours. I mourn for 3 hours. I give myself 3, and then I swim. So I cried for 3 hours, and then I swam 60 laps. And then I said to the boys, we're going to have steaks on the grill. I'll be back. I'm going to the market alone. I went to the market. I came home, and the boys were standing on the front porch with Lucy saying, Mother, get out of the car now. Get in the kitchen and listen to the messages. You must. I said, I've got to get in the kitchen now. Jesus. So I went into the kitchen, pressed the button. Kate, this is Rick Berman calling. I'm the executive producer of Star Trek Voyager. And I just wanted to say, welcome aboard, Captain. I said to the children and Lucy, although not a practicing Catholic, on your knees in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and pull the champagne out of the refrigerator while you're at it. I didn't know anything, and I went in like that. So it stood me in very good stead that I was ignorant. I gave Janeway Mulgrew. I had no preconceptions, and I was free. So aside from the technobabble, which was harrowing, can you imagine? How would you like to learn Japanese overnight? I just did it my own way.
You spoke about being raised on a 50-acre estate in Iowa and then going to New York. And I wonder what your views are with that background about this whole free-range child raising.
Like free-range chickens? Or free-range child raising? I'm a free-range child. Who, these helicopter parents? Take a Valium, have a vodka. It's fine. It's fine. 50 acres of farmland, timberland, creekland, and 7 brothers and sisters to explore it with? It's just fine to be a free-range chicken.
Very quick question. It's not about the book or the theater or anything like this. I know that you went to Africa and you spoke very eloquently and funnily about this in Connecticut a couple of months ago, I believe.
Oh, were you in Summers?
That's right, yes.
Oh, right.
So I was wondering, how did this trip come about? Where did
Africa.
Safari?
I've always wanted to go to Africa. Always. And of course, there was the Ebola crisis and the Ebola scare, and everybody said, oh, I said, I'm going. So I got my friend Laura Ross, and I found a wonderful outfitter, and I went. But here's the thing. Did I tell you this in Summers? I left the safari after 2 weeks and went alone into the bush with my Maasai warrior, where there is no red alert, ladies and gentlemen. There is only the bush. And he took me into the middle of herds of calving elephants. I saw the most remarkable things. It was life-changing, life-changing. You who have not been there must go. Raise your hands if you have not been to Africa. Oh, my God. All right, I'll get right on this.
My 6th grade teacher was Maggie Hagen.
You are?
My 6th grade teacher was Maggie Hagen. Tim Hagen's sister.
Oh.
And
My second husband.
There was
The
nothing
great
I
love
wanted
of my
more
life.
than her to bring you to class every single day because I knew that she was related to you. But my question goes back to the first thing you talked about. What was your favorite Captain Janeway hairstyle?
See what I mean about men? There's always a surprise. I loathed them all until they just let me have my own hair back and down, right? Because I've got a complement of 165. We're lost. I got to find the wormhole, right? I got to let it go. I mean, some of them were downright bouffant, right? The Belle Epoque. So that's the one I loved the most. Thank you for that erudite and searching question.
No one has asked about this, and I don't know how many people know about it, evidently, but NTSF SD SUV, how did that come about?
Say it fast, 5 times.
And I was just wondering how that came about, because I had seen
NTSF
you
SUV.
with the captains at Philly Comic-Con, and then the next year you were doing that, and I was like, kind of out of the blue.
That was Paul
Scheer.
Paul Scheer, who called me directly, long shot, and said, I'm doing this thing. It's a complete takeoff on all procedurals. We're just going to have a riot. And I know you'll say no, but would you be interested in playing the head of this unit? And I said, yes, I'd love to come out. So I went out for, was it 3 seasons?
Yes.
We shot for 4 or 5 weeks and had a ball. I mean, I worked with some of the best comedians in Los Angeles, right?
Yes.
I laughed and laughed and laughed. What's better than that? And Cove could be very self-serious. I had the eye patch, right? I had my podcast. I was always seducing some 10-year-old, yes. She was a marvelous, marvelous example. Next question.
Protective mother.
We've got another one right back.
Thank
Quick
you.
and easy.
Yes.
But very important. What's your favorite whiskey?
But do
We
you
need
see
to
what
know.
I mean about men?
Can you blame me?
I mean, yeah. It's quick and easy, but very important. Yes. Darling, what is it?
No, what is your favorite whiskey, he asked.
My favorite whiskey, Jameson. Are you nuts?
Yeah! All right, good answer.
Do I look like a loser to you?
All right, what are you doing after the show?
Jameson.
Back from Africa in October.
Where were you?
Kenya.
I wanted so to go to Kenya, but I was warned against Kenya, and I don't know why I took that admonition seriously. Well, you can go to Kenya, right?
Of course. I've been twice.
Did
It's
you?
the
You
most
flew into
beautiful-
Nairobi and went up to Mara?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, and Mombasa, and it was Amboseli, where all the elephants
Did you have
are.
a Maasai with you?
No, he's from the tribe called the Luo.
Oh,
They're
how are
in,
they?
They're near the Lake Victoria. He was a very nice man. Anyway, I'm
so
sorry.
sorry.
I just wanted to say that I enjoyed your performance in Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins.
Yeah, that was fun.
And my question was, and I'm sorry if you've been asked this question before, but what's your favorite Voyager episode?
Unanswerable. Do you know that I did 26 a year for 7 years? I love Death Wish. Janeway got to confront her true morality for the first time. Q, who believes and subscribes to the continuum, living forever, has a nephew who wishes to have the right to die. Friend, and I'm opposed to this. And over the period of the course of the trial, I realized that, of course, he's entitled to his own decision about his life or his death. That was wonderful. And counterpoint, because I got to fall in love. Or did I? Did he? Did I? It was great fun.
One
yes.
right in the middle and back.
Hi.
Hi.
I can't believe I'm talking to you. I just want to basically say, when I was going through college, that's when I first became aware of Voyager, and it really helped me get through a tough time. I was in the process of coming out, and I was in the process of dealing with a abusive relationship. When I finally got the courage to leave it, I started doing this thing called the MS Bike Ride, where we ride from Philadelphia to Ocean City. It's about 80 miles. And I built a team these last 4 years, and I've been calling it Voyager because it's all about the journey, it's about the strength, it's about becoming stronger as you go. And I just want to say thank you for all of that.
No, I thank you because you understand what it's all about, love. Voyager's a metaphor, right? This is a planet. It's called the planet Earth. We're all on it for a very limited period of time. And we only have one another to lean on, to understand it, to get through it. And I think that the fact that you embrace that philosophy is greatly to your credit. Good for you.
Thank you.
What
What inspired you to play Red as in Orange is the New Black?
What inspired me to play it?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I was offered it. But you know what happened, hun? I have to audition for everything. Very few actors are offered roles. I suppose Angelina Jolie is offered roles. But I auditioned, and they gave me a tiny piece of paper, no more than half a page. And on the top it said, this is a Russian. She'll be the cook. She's of Russian descent, but she's fully assimilated into the American culture. So we want just the merest suggestion of her Russian background. Other than that, but that is not what came out of my mouth. She flew right into my imagination and directly out of my mouth. And there she was, and she was whole, and she was realized. And I guess they agreed, because they offered me the part. And I'm so glad they did, because this is blissful. Do you know that? To play her, oh, it's wonderfully freeing. Yes, one more question.
On our right here.
Let's make it a good one on my 59th
I
day.
hope it's good. I was wondering what your thoughts are on the one-way trips to Mars and the future of any, possible colonies and
I
stuff
think
like
they
that.
need to become round trips, don't you?
Round-
And they will very soon. You are a fabulous audience. I'm now going to sign. Let's go out and do it.